The morning sun of Kepler Station cast long shadows through the massive transparent aluminum windows of Lecture Hall Omega-7. Commander Veltar straightened his ceremonial uniform, the crystalline threads catching the light as he surveyed the most diverse classroom in Galactic Defense Academy history. 24 alien cadets from 12 different worlds sat in specially designed seats that accommodated everything from tentacles to energy forms. Cadet Minho shifted uncomfortably in his meditation pod, his pale blue skin reflecting the soft bioluminescence that marked all Altarians. His people had eliminated warfare 3,000 years ago through advanced mental discipline, and studying violence still made his stomach churn. He adjusted his biorecorder with delicate fingers, each one ending in a small sensory node that could detect emotional frequencies from across a room. "Settle down, everyone." Veltar's voice resonated through the hall's acoustic amplifiers, designed to translate meaning across species barriers. Today marks a historic moment in our Academy's curriculum. Beside Minho, Cadet Jiwon's compound, eyes clicked rapidly as she processed data streams. Her Zephyrian heritage showed in the way her mind automatically calculated resource distributions, population densities, and logistical requirements for everything around her. Even now, she was analyzing the energy consumption of the lecture hall's life support systems. Her species had fought exactly 3 wars in their recorded history, each lasting no more than 47 standard days before economic efficiency demanded peace negotiations. The insectoid Cadet Kyung drummed his razor-sharp claws against his desk's metal surface, creating a rhythmic tapping that served as his species' equivalent of nervous fidgeting. His people, the Vexkari, had evolved from hive-minded predators but had long since abandoned physical conflict as wasteful. Why fight when you could simply outcalculate your opponents into submission? His multifaceted eyes scanned the room, automatically assessing threat levels and exit strategies, old instincts that served him well in tactical studies. "We have a new species joining our galactic collective," Veltar announced, his crystalline features shifting into what other species had learned to recognize as excitement. They call themselves humans, from a small blue world in the Sol system. A ripple of polite interest moved through the classroom. New species always brought fascinating case studies. The peaceful luminary cadets glowed slightly brighter, their natural curiosity activated. The reptilian Saurian students flicked their tongues, tasting the air for chemical changes that might indicate important information. Their planet achieved faster-than-light travel only recently, Veltar continued, manipulating the holographic display that materialized above his lectern. A rotating image of Earth appeared, its blue oceans and white clouds looking deceptively serene. "They've requested integration assistance, which means we need to study their historical conflict patterns to better understand their psychology." Cadet Seojun, whose energy-based form flickered with different colors based on his emotional state, pulsed a gentle yellow indicating mild interest. His people had transcended physical form millennia ago, and studying primitive species was always entertaining. They usually had such simple motivations: food, territory, mating rights, nothing that couldn't be resolved through basic resource redistribution. "Now I know what you're thinking," Veltar said, his tone taking on the slightly patronizing quality that professors across the galaxy seem to share. "Another primitive species with basic territorial disputes. We've seen it all before." The cadets nodded in agreement. They had indeed seen it all before. The Carathian Empire's brief 30-year expansion phase, the Deltaran resource wars that lasted all of 6 months before both sides realized they were spending more on weapons than the disputed asteroids were worth. The Great Mollusk Rebellion that ended when someone invented better synthetic pearls. However, Veltar raised one crystalline finger, humans present some unique characteristics that make them interesting study subjects. Cadet Hyejin, one of the few predatory species in the class, perked up at this. Her people, the Feltari, had retained more of their hunting instincts than most galactic civilizations, though they'd channeled them into competitive sports and complex strategy games. Her silver fur rippled as her enhanced senses detected something in Veltar's pheromone output that suggested nervousness. They achieved technological advancement at an unusual rate, Veltar explained, pulling up comparative development charts. Most species take approximately 50,000 standard years to progress from basic tool use to spaceflight. Humans accomplished this in roughly 6,000 years. The mathematical impossibility of this statement caused Ji-won to make a small, chittering sound of confusion. Her rapid calculations couldn't make the numbers work with any known development model. Furthermore, Veltar continued, they accomplished this rapid advancement while maintaining continuous low-level conflict across their entire planet. Now the room was genuinely interested. Species typically achieved rapid technological advancement through cooperation and resource sharing. Conflict was universally recognized as inefficient and counterproductive to progress. Today, we'll examine humanity's conflict patterns to understand how a species can simultaneously fight and innovate. Veltar's expression grew serious. This analysis will help us better integrate them into our peaceful galactic community. The lights began to dim as the holographic projectors powered up for the presentation. The cadets settled into their respective resting positions, biorecorders activated, note-taking apparatus ready. They expected to see the usual pattern, brief skirmishes over hunting grounds, maybe some resource competition, the occasional territorial dispute between early settlements. How wrong they were. The holographic display flickered to life, showing a primitive Earth landscape dotted with small settlements. Two groups of early humans faced each other across a grassy plain, crude spears and stone axes glinting in the ancient sunlight. The alien cadets leaned forward with academic interest as the first conflict began. Observe the basic territorial behavior, Commander Veltar narrated as the primitive warriors clashed. Notice how they fight for hunting grounds and water sources, completely standard resource competition. Cadet Suhyun, whose tentacled form allowed her to take notes on multiple data pads simultaneously, whispered to her study partner through her translator device. Standard resource competition. My homeworld had similar phases 12,000 years ago. Her people, the aquatic Krell, had evolved past such conflicts when they learned to farm kelp forests efficiently. The other cadets nodded in agreement, their various biorecorders humming softly as they documented what appeared to be textbook primitive warfare. Cadet Donghyun's energy form pulsed a calm blue color, indicating his relaxed state. His species had seen countless worlds go through this exact same phase, but then the holographic timeline began accelerating. Suddenly, the display showed organized human armies in bronze armor, thousands strong, marching in disciplined formations. The cadets' note-taking became more rapid as they observed the increased scale. When Egyptian chariots thundered across desert battlefields, Cadet Kyung's claws stopped their rhythmic tapping against his desk. Interesting, he chittered through his translator. They're already developing combined arms tactics. Most species take several millennia to coordinate different unit types. The timeline jumped forward again. Greek phalanxes moved like living, wars of bronze and iron, their shields locked together in perfect geometric precision. The alien cadets watched with growing fascination as human warfare evolved from chaotic tribal skirmishes into calculated military science. Then, Rome appeared on the screen. The lecture hall fell silent as endless columns of legionaries marched across the holographic display. They moved with mechanical precision, their armor standardized, their weapons identical, their formations flawless. The camera view pulled back to show the impossible scope, Roman armies stretching to the horizon, tens of thousands of soldiers moving as one organism. They conquered most of their known world, Veltar explained, his crystalline voice carrying a note of disbelief even after reviewing this material dozens of times. 3 continents, 50 million people under one military system. Cadet Minho's peaceful Altarian biology couldn't process what he was seeing. His biosigns spiked dangerously as his meditation training failed him for the first time in his life. How many soldiers? He gasped, his bioluminescent skin flickering with distress. Conservative estimates suggest Rome maintained 400,000 active military personnel at their peak, Veltar replied. The number hit the alien cadets like a physical blow. Most galactic civilizations had never fielded more than a few thousand warriors in their entire history. The Zephyrian homeworld's largest conflict had involved barely 500 combatants. On each side, the timeline accelerated again, and medieval warfare exploded across the display. Massive stone castles rose from the earth, their walls bristling with defensive weapons. Siege engines the size of buildings hurled massive stones, air fortifications that took decades to construct. Human armies now numbered in the hundreds of thousands, their supply lines stretching across continents. They're fighting for centuries over the same territories, Cadet G1 observed, her compound eyes clicking rapidly as she tried to calculate the resource expenditure. Her mathematical mind reeled at the inefficiency. The 100 Years' War alone consumed resources equivalent to terraforming 6 planets, but the real shock came when the display reached the Napoleonic era. The alien cadets watched in stunned silence as human armies swept across Europe like living tsunamis. Battle after battle flashed across the screen, Austerlitz, Wagram, Borodino, each involving hundreds of thousands of soldiers. The scale was incomprehensible to species that resolved conflicts through meditation, mathematical optimization, or simple resource trading. They're fighting on multiple continents simultaneously, Cadet Minho gasped, his peaceful nature completely overwhelmed. His biorecorder was producing readings that suggested imminent psychological collapse. How is this possible? Napoleon's Grande Armée marched across the frozen Russian steppes, 600,000 strong. The alien cadets watched in horror as winter and warfare combined to destroy the largest military force any of them had ever imagined. The retreat from Moscow showed endless columns of frozen human soldiers stretching beyond the horizon. The casualty numbers alone exceed the total population of most member worlds. Cadet Seojan flickered, his energy forms cycling through confused color patterns. His people had never witnessed such dedication to organized destruction. Several of the more sensitive species began showing signs of distress. The peaceful luminary cadets dimmed visibly, their natural glow fading as their optimistic worldview cracked. 2 of the meditation-based Altarians had already activated their emergency relaxation protocols. Then the timeline reached the 20th century, and everything changed. The holographic display exploded with images that defied comprehension. World War I trenches stretched like scars across entire continents. Millions of human soldiers faced each other across no man's land, using weapons that could kill thousands in minutes. Artillery barrages that lasted for days, consuming more explosives than most civilizations produced in centuries. 60 million. Casualties in the second global conflict, Veltar announced, his voice barely steady. That's more than the total population of the Zephyrian, Altarian, and Krell homeworlds combined. Cadet G1's calculations went completely haywire. Her methodical brain couldn't process numbers that large. They mobilized entire civilizations into war machines, she stuttered, her translator struggling to convey her species' equivalent of complete mathematical breakdown. Every factory, every resource, every citizen contributing to weapons production. The display showed human industrial capacity converted to military production, aircraft factories producing bombers by the thousands, shipyards launching warships, weekly millions of workers producing ammunition around the clock. The scale of organization was beyond anything the Galactic Cadets had imagined possible. They turned their entire planet into a weapons factory, Cadet Hyejin whispered, her predatory instincts recognizing something terrifying in humanity's approach to warfare. Even her aggressive species had never conceived of such total commitment to conflict. The breathing apparatus of several aquatic species began working overtime as panic set in. The insectoid cadets' exoskeletons clicked nervously as their stress responses activated. Half the class was showing signs of acute psychological distress as they tried to comprehend a species that could fight wars involving entire continents, while simultaneously advancing their technology at impossible speeds, and the presentation was just getting started. The holographic display shifted to show a single human aircraft flying high above a city. The alien cadets watched with detached curiosity as the small vessel approached what appeared to be a normal urban center, bustling with civilian activity. Commander Veltar's crystalline features grew impossibly rigid as he prepared to show footage that had given him nightmares for weeks. What you're about to witness represents humanity's transition into what they call modern warfare, he announced, his voice carrying undertones that made several translation devices spark with confusion. The aircraft released a single object. It fell silently through the morning sky, no bigger than a small transport pod. The alien cadets leaned forward, expecting to see another conventional explosive device like the artillery shells from earlier footage. Then the world turned white. The explosion filled the entire holographic display with blinding light. When the brightness faded, the city was gone. Simply gone. Where moments before had stood buildings, streets, and millions of human lives, now only an expanding mushroom-shaped cloud rose into the atmosphere. Cadet Kyung's compound eyes locked, in position, unable to process what they'd witnessed. His entire exoskeleton began trembling as his species' threat assessment systems overloaded. The Vexkari had fought their most devastating war over a disputed asteroid mining station. Perhaps 3,000 casualties total. This single human weapon had just erased a population larger than his entire homeworld. One bomb, he chittered through his malfunctioning translator. One bomb did that. The display continued with clinical precision, showing the aftermath. Human scientists measured radiation levels, documented the destruction radius, calculated blast effects with the same methodical approach other species used to plan agricultural rotations. The thermal radiation had vaporized everything within 2 kilometers. The shockwave had flattened buildings for 20 kilometers in every direction. They built thousands of these weapons, Veltar continued, his voice now barely above a whisper. Each one capable of destroying entire cities. Cadet Donghyun's energy form began flickering erratically between colors that had no translation in galactic standard languages. His people had transcended physical form specifically to avoid the possibility of physical destruction. The concept that any species could create weapons capable of eliminating entire populations in seconds violated every principle of cosmic evolution. They dropped 2 on their own species, he whispered, his form now cycling through patterns of pure horror. During the same war on their own kind. The implications hit the classroom like a physical wave. Every galactic civilization had developed strict taboos against weapons of mass destruction, specifically because they made victory meaningless. What was the point of conquering territory that would be uninhabitable for generations? How could any species be so tactically brilliant, yet strategically insane? But the presentation wasn't finished. The timeline advanced to show what humans called conventional modern warfare, though nothing about it seemed conventional to the alien observers. Carpet bombing campaigns unfolded across the display, endless, streams of human aircraft dropping thousands of explosives across entire regions. Cities burned for days, as waves of bombers turned urban centers into firestorms that consumed everything combustible. Cadet Suhyun's tentacles began convulsing as her aquatic nervous system tried to process the scale of destruction. Her people resolved conflicts by temporarily redirecting ocean currents. The idea of deliberately creating firestorms that could be seen from orbit was beyond her comprehension. The thermal effects alone killed more civilians than most galactic wars involved total participants, she gurgled through her water-filled breathing apparatus. The footage shifted to ground combat, and the alien cadets discovered that human individual warriors were somehow even more terrifying than their weapons of mass destruction. The display showed human soldiers continuing to fight with injuries that would incapacitate any other known species. Arms destroyed by explosions, legs shattered by projectiles, faces scarred by fire, yet they kept advancing, kept fighting, kept coordinating with their units. Cadet Minho's bioluminescent skin began strobing in patterns associated with complete psychological breakdown. His people's meditation training included techniques for accepting pain, but what he was witnessing transcended any definition of acceptable suffering. Human soldiers were fighting effectively with wounds that would send most galactic species into immediate hibernation for emergency healing. Their pain tolerance exceeds our medical understanding, he gasped, his biorecorder now producing readings that suggested he was experiencing sympathetic trauma just from watching the footage. Then the display showed human special forces. Elite human warriors emerged from the footage, like something from the galaxy's darkest nightmares. They moved through environments that would kill most species instantly, underwater for impossible durations, through Arctic conditions that froze water solid, across desert heat that could melt metal. They infiltrated enemy positions by swimming through sewage systems, crawling through ventilation shafts barely wider than their bodies, hiding, motionless for days in positions that would drive most beings insane from sensory deprivation. They volunteer for suicide missions, Veltar explained, his crystalline voice cracking with disbelief. Missions with zero probability of survival, and they compete for the privilege. The classroom atmosphere became toxic with terror as the implications sank in. Every galactic civilization had evolved past the point where individuals would sacrifice themselves for abstract concepts. Self-preservation was the most fundamental drive in all known intelligent life. Yet humans had somehow retained both advanced intelligence and primitive willingness to die for their groups. Cadet Hyejin, whose predatory heritage had prepared her better than most for violent imagery, found herself backing away from her desk. Hare's footage showed human commandos infiltrating fortified positions. Her species had sharp claws and enhanced reflexes, but they fought for territory and resources. These humans fought for ideas, for concepts, for principles that didn't even provide immediate survival benefits. They're hunting their own species with the same dedication most apex predators reserve for prey animals, she growled, her silver fur standing on end as every instinct screamed danger warnings. The breaking point came when the display showed human berserkers, warriors who entered trance states that eliminated their fear responses entirely. Ancient footage showed Vikings charging into battle without armor, their faces twisted into expressions of pure fury. Modern footage showed similar phenomena, human soldiers advancing through hostile fire with expressions of calm determination that was somehow more terrifying than any battle rage. They weaponized their own psychological states. Cadet Seojun flickered, his energy form now cycling through colors that indicated complete cognitive overload. They turned their emotions into tactical advantages. 3 cadets, simultaneously, activated their emergency medical protocols. The peaceful luminari dimmed to barely visible levels as their optimistic worldview suffered complete systematic failure. 2 Altarians had entered protective meditation comas that might last for weeks. The reptilian Saurian students began shedding their skin in stress responses that their species reserved for encounters with planetary extinction-level threats. Their chemical sensors were detecting pheromones from their classmates that indicated imminent psychological collapse across multiple species simultaneously. Class dismissed, Commander Veltar announced, as half the remaining cadets began filing toward the exits, their various forms of locomotion creating a symphony of retreat. Resume tomorrow for those who can continue. But everyone knew that most of them wouldn't be back. The resignation papers were already being transmitted to Academy administration as species after species discovered that there were some things in the universe too terrible to study, even in the name of galactic understanding. In the growing silence of the lecture hall, only the sound of various breathing apparatus and the hum of emergency medical devices remained as evidence that intelligence sometimes came with a price too high to pay. The lecture hall felt enormous, with only 6 occupied, seats scattered across the vast amphitheater, where 24 eager alien cadets had gathered just days before. Now only the hardiest survivors remained, their various forms hunched in positions that suggested both determination and deep psychological trauma. Cadet Hyejin sat rigid in her specialized chair, her silver fur still bristling from the previous session's revelations. Her predatory heritage had prepared her better than most for violent imagery, but even her species' warrior traditions paled beside what they'd witnessed. Her enhanced senses picked up the stress pheromones radiating from her fellow survivors: fear, confusion, and something else she couldn't identify. Beside her, Cadet Seojun's energy form flickered between rapid color changes as his analytical mind processed data streams at maximum capacity. His people had transcended physical form millennia ago, but the footage of human warfare had shown him that physical beings could achieve levels of organized destruction that energy beings had thought impossible. His consciousness kept calculating casualty rates, resource expenditures, and tactical innovations that shouldn't exist. The massive cadet Taiho from the silicon-based Carathian species sat like a living boulder, his crystalline form reflecting the lecture hall's lights in patterns. That indicated deep contemplation. His people were virtually indestructible by conventional means, yet watching humans create weapons that could vaporize entire cities had shaken his fundamental understanding of what was possible in warfare. Commander Veltar entered the hall, looking like he'd aged several centuries since their last meeting. His crystalline features, normally pristine and geometrically perfect, now showed stress fractures that reflected his internal state. He moved slowly to his lectern, gathering himself, before facing the 6 survivors who represented the psychological toughest specimens from 12 different civilizations. "I want to begin today by acknowledging your courage," he said, his voice carrying harmonics of exhaustion that translated across all species barriers. 18 of your classmates have either resigned from the academy or requested transfer to non-military educational tracks. Their decisions were entirely reasonable. The survivors exchanged glances through their various sensory organs. They'd all wondered if they were making a mistake by continuing with the program. "What you witnessed over the past sessions represents humanity's adolescent phase," Veltar continued, manipulating his holographic controls with trembling fingers. "But there's more to understand about this species before we can properly integrate them into our galactic community." The display activated, but instead of the horrific warfare footage they'd been subjected to, it showed something completely different. A sleek human starship drifted peacefully through space, its hull reflecting the light of distant stars. The design was elegant, purposeful, clearly advanced technology, but somehow non-threatening. "This is the UES Harmony," Veltar explained, "a human peacekeeping vessel currently operating in the outer spiral conflicts." The footage shifted to show the ship's interior. Human crew members moved through corridors with calm efficiency, their faces showing none of the battle fury or berserker intensity from the historical records. These humans looked peaceful, professional. Their uniforms were clean, their movements measured, their expressions focused but serene. Cadet Minwoo, whose gaseous form had barely survived the previous sessions, pulsed with confused colors. "They look completely different from the warriors we studied," he whispered through his atmospheric translator. The display showed the Harmony approaching a conflict zone where Rigelian pirates had been attacking civilian shipping lanes. Instead of immediately engaging with weapons, the human ship transmitted on all frequencies in dozens of galactic languages. "Attention all vessels. This is Captain Park of the United Earth Peacekeeping Service. We're here to mediate this dispute and ensure civilian safety. All parties please respond for negotiation." The alien cadets watched in fascination as the human captain appeared on screen. She was middle-aged by human standards, her grey hair pulled back in a practical style, her expression calm but alert. Nothing about her suggested the warrior heritage they'd witnessed in the historical footage. "The Rigelian raiders initially refused to negotiate," Veltar narrated as the footage continued. "They'd been successfully attacking merchant vessels for months and no galactic authority had been able to stop them. But something interesting happened next. As the human ship maintained its position without aggressive moves, the pirate vessels began to slow their attacks. Their formation, initially aggressive and predatory, started to show signs of uncertainty. "Captain, they're not responding to standard diplomatic protocols," came a voice from the human ship's bridge. "Should we withdraw and request military support?" Captain Park studied her tactical display with an expression of patient analysis. "Negative. They're testing us. Maintain position and keep communications open. They'll make contact when they're ready." Cadet Hyejin's predatory instincts recognized something profound in the human captain's behavior. It was the patience of an apex predator, not the desperate aggression of prey animals, but the calm confidence of something that knew it was the most dangerous thing in the area. 12 hours later, Veltar continued, the pirates initiated contact. The display showed the pirate leader, a scarred Rigelian whose reptilian features twisted with barely contained aggression. "Human vessel, you will withdraw immediately, or face the consequences." Captain Park's response was delivered with the same calm tone she might use to discuss weather patterns. I understand your position, but we can't allow attacks on civilian shipping to continue. However, I'm willing to discuss alternative solutions that address your underlying concerns. What happened next astonished the alien cadets. Instead of escalating to violence, the human captain actually began negotiating with the pirates about their economic conditions, their territorial disputes with galactic authorities, and their legitimate grievances about trade route regulations. She's treating them like people instead of criminals, Cadet Seojun observed, his analytical processes detecting patterns he'd never seen before. Most species would either flee or attack. She's finding a third option. The negotiations continued for days, shown in time-lapse across the holographic display. The human crew maintained perfect discipline throughout, never showing impatience or aggression, despite being vastly outnumbered by the pirate fleet. The breakthrough came when Captain Park offered to escort the pirates to a neutral station where they could register formal complaints about trade regulations, Veltar explained, something no other galactic authority had ever suggested. The pirate leader's expression gradually changed from hostile suspicion to grudging respect. You would guarantee safe passage, even after our attacks on your people's shipping. Violence usually stems from unaddressed problems, Captain Park replied simply. Let's address the problems. The resolution was unprecedented in galactic law. Enforcement. The pirates voluntarily surrendered their stolen goods, accepted escort to legal proceedings, and eventually became legitimate security contractors protecting the same trade routes they'd once attacked. Human peacekeeping forces are now the most requested backup in the galaxy, Veltar explained to the stunned cadets. Not despite their violent heritage, because of it. When diplomatic species cannot understand why aggressors persist in violence, humans understand perfectly. Cadet Taiho's crystalline form resonated with a low harmonic that indicated profound realization. They know violence intimately, so they know how to address its root causes. Exactly, Veltar confirmed. They've learned to weaponize their understanding of conflict itself. They can speak the language of violence fluently enough to translate it into the language of peace. The survivors sat in contemplative silence as the implications settled over them. Humanity hadn't simply evolved past their violent nature. They'd transformed it into something entirely new. They'd become the galaxy's violence experts, the specialists called in when other species couldn't comprehend why anyone would choose conflict over cooperation. They were the guardians who could guard against themselves. 5 years had passed since that terrible day in Lecture Hall Omega-7, and the galaxy had quietly become a different place. The 6 surviving cadets from Commander Veltar's infamous class had indeed graduated with the highest honors in Academy history, but more importantly, they had become something unprecedented in galactic civilization, beings who truly understood the nature of controlled violence. Cadet Hyejin, now Senior Diplomatic Liaison Hyejin, stood on the bridge of the GSV Peaceful Resolution as it approached the asteroid mining station where the latest crisis was unfolding. Her silver fur had darkened, with age and experience, but her predatory instincts remained sharp. Beside her, Corporal Park maintained his characteristic calm as he studied the tactical displays, showing 17 heavily armed pirate vessels surrounding the civilian station. Standard operating procedure would be to call in the Galactic Defense Fleet, Hyejin observed, watching the pirates' ships move in aggressive formation patterns. 3 battle cruisers could overwhelm them in minutes. Corporal Park nodded thoughtfully, his steady eyes analyzing the situation with the same methodical approach she'd learned to recognize in all human peacekeepers. Could, he agreed quietly. But then we'd have 17 ships worth of debris, potentially hundreds of casualties, and the underlying problem would still exist. The mining station's distress signals painted a desperate picture. The Andromedian Syndicate had been raiding Outer Rim installations for months, their attacks becoming increasingly bold as they accumulated stolen ships and weapons. Traditional galactic law enforcement had failed repeatedly. The pirates simply scattered when military vessels approached, then regrouped elsewhere. "Attention pirate vessels," Park transmitted on all frequencies, his voice carrying the same calm authority that had become legendary throughout the galaxy. "This is Corporal Park of the United Earth Peacekeeping Service. I'd like to discuss your concerns with the current mining rights arrangements. Hyejin watched the pirate formation carefully. Her enhanced senses could detect the subtle changes in their movement patterns as confusion rippled through their ranks. Most galactic authorities would have immediately demanded surrender or threatened overwhelming force. The human approach of actually acknowledging their grievances was something few species could comprehend. The pirate leader's response crackled through the communication systems, his voice thick with the universal translator's attempt to convey Andromedian aggression patterns. Human vessel, you are outnumbered 17-1. Withdraw immediately or face destruction. Park's expression didn't change as he opened a private channel to Hyejin. What do you think? Fear-based aggression or genuine territorial defense? Hyejin's predatory heritage allowed her to read body language across species barriers better than most diplomatic corps members. Territorial defense, she replied, after studying the pirate leader's image. Look at the stress patterns around. His optical organs. He's protecting something, not just raiding for profit. That's what I thought too, Park nodded, then reopened general communications. I understand you feel threatened by the mining operations. The peaceful resolution is here to mediate, not to fight. May I ask what specific concerns you have about the current situation? What happened next demonstrated why human peacekeepers had become the most effective conflict resolution specialists in the galaxy. Instead of escalating to violence, Park began a careful dialogue that revealed the true source of the conflict. The Andromedian Syndicate wasn't simply a pirate organization. They were refugees whose homeworld had been strip-mined by the same corporation now operating in this system. They destroyed our breeding grounds, the pirate leader finally admitted after hours of patient negotiation. The chemicals they use in their extraction process poison the spawning pools for generations. We have nowhere else to go. Hyejin felt her own understanding deepen as she watched Park process this information without judgment or immediate solutions. Human peacekeepers had learned something that other galactic species struggled with. Sometimes violence was the only language desperate beings could speak, and the key to peace was learning to translate that language into constructive action. I can't undo the damage to your homeworld, Park said simply, but I can help ensure it doesn't happen again. The Galactic Environmental Protection Protocols were established specifically to prevent this type of ecological destruction. The negotiations that followed took 3 days, during which the peaceful resolution maintained position between the pirates and the mining station, while Park worked with both sides to develop a solution. The mining corporation was required to implement environmental safeguards and provide compensation for the Andromedian refugees. The pirates were granted protected status as an endangered species and given territorial rights to several uninhabited systems suitable for their reproductive needs. Not a single shot was fired, as the former pirates escorted the mining ships to ensure compliance with the new environmental protocols. Hyejin found herself studying her human colleague with renewed appreciation. Park had just prevented a war that could have consumed dozens of systems, and he'd done it not through superior firepower, but through superior understanding of what violence really meant. How do you do it? She asked, as they watched the peaceful resolution unfold on their tactical displays. How do you always know what they're really fighting about? Park was quiet for a long moment, his steady eyes reflecting something that Hyejin had learned to recognize in all human peacekeepers, the weight of knowledge that came from their species' violent heritage. Because we've been there, he said, finally. Every form of violence, every justification for conflict, every desperate decision that leads to war, humanity has been through all of it. The truth of his words hit her like a physical force. The horrific footage from their academy days hadn't just been historical documentation, it had been a species' complete education in every possible form of organized destruction. Humans didn't just study warfare theoretically. They had lived it, perfected it, and then chosen to transcend it. The other species see our weapons and our history and think we're monsters, Park continued, watching as the last pirate vessel accepted its new role as environmental protector. But they don't understand that we're the only species that knows exactly how monstrous we could be and chooses differently every single day. Hyejin finally understood what made human peacekeepers so effective. When pirates or raiders or desperate Refugees looked at other galactic species. They saw prey or obstacles or authority figures who couldn't comprehend their desperation. But when they looked at humans, they saw beings who understood violence so completely that their choice to pursue peace carried absolute authority. The galaxy had become safer not because humanity had evolved past its capacity for destruction, but because they had learned to wield that capacity as a tool for peace. Their restraint wasn't weakness, it was the most terrifying form of strength imaginable. As the peaceful resolution began its journey to the next crisis, Hyejin reflected on how the galaxy had quietly transformed. The 18 cadets who had resigned from the academy now worked in peaceful sectors, their innocence gone but their principles intact, forever grateful that beings like Park stood between civilization and the darkness they'd glimpsed in that lecture hall. Meanwhile, the 6 survivors had become the backbone of galactic peacekeeping, working alongside human partners who never spoke of the terrible footage but carried its weight in their steady eyes. Together, they had created something new in the universe, a form of peace maintained not through ignorance of violence, but through complete mastery of it. The galaxy slept safer, knowing that its guardians were the only species that truly understood what they were guarding against. The end.